The church doors creaked as I pushed them open, my weathered hands trembling slightly against the polished oak. The sound of a string quartet playing Pachelbel's canon filled the sanctuary, but I heard something else too, a hushed whisper that cut through the music like a knife. The old beggar showed up. I froze, my rented suit suddenly feeling too tight around my collar. Those words, spoken by Daniel, my soon-to-be son-in-law, to his best man, weren't meant for my ears. But at 63, my hearing was the one thing that hadn't failed me yet. For a moment, I considered turning around and walking out. Maybe it would be easier that way. Easier than watching my only daughter, Olivia, marry a man who saw me as nothing more than a shameful inconvenience. But I'd promised Margaret on her deathbed that I'd always be there for our girl. So I straightened my tie, brushed an imaginary speck from my sleeve, and continued down the aisle. The sanctuary of St. Matthew's Episcopal Church in downtown Boston was filled with strangers in designer clothes. The Hendersons, Daniel's family, had spared no expense. Crystal chandeliers had been brought in to supplement the church's modest lighting. White roses and lilies draped every pew. A red carpet had been laid down the center aisle. The air smelled of expensive perfume and old money. I slipped into a pew near the back, nodding politely to the well-dressed couple already seated there. The woman's eyes flicked over my suit, the best J.C. Penney had to offer, but clearly out of place among the Tom Ford and Armani surrounding me. She leaned away slightly, as if poverty might be contagious. I hadn't been invited to the rehearsal dinner, hadn't been asked to participate in any of the pre-wedding events. The invitation had arrived at my small apartment above Romano's Pizza in South Boston just 3 weeks ago, addressed formally to Mr. James Mitchell. Not Dad, not even Jim. I'd called Olivia immediately, and her response had been telling. "Oh, I wasn't sure you'd want to come. It's going to be quite formal." The quartet shifted to Bach as more guests arrived. I watched the door, hoping to catch a glimpse of Olivia before the ceremony. Instead, I saw Daniel's parents, Robert and Elaine Henderson, walking in with the confidence of people who'd never had to check their bank balance before making a purchase. Robert was a third-generation investment banker whose family had somehow emerged from every financial crisis richer than before. Elaine was old Boston money. Her great-grandfather had owned half the textile mills in Massachusetts. I shrank into my seat, hoping they wouldn't notice me. The last time I'd seen them was at the engagement dinner at the Ritz-Carlton. Robert had asked what I did these days, and when I explained I was still running my small contracting business, he'd nodded with the exaggerated interest people show when they're not listening at all. "How quaint," Elaine had said, sipping her champagne. "Honest work." As if my 35 years of building and repairing homes across Boston was some charming hobby rather than the labor that had put food on our table and eventually helped pay for Olivia's education at Wellesley. The church continued to fill. I recognized a few faces from Olivia's childhood, teachers, neighbors from our old neighborhood in Dorchester, but they were seated far at the front, probably listed as bride's family friends, rather than seated with the father of the bride. A young usher approached me, his smile practiced. "Are you with the bride or groom?" "The bride," I said. "I'm her father." His smile faltered. "Oh, Mr. Mitchell, I'm so sorry I didn't. You should be in the front. Please follow me." As he led me forward, I felt the stares. These weren't just wedding guests watching the procession. These were Boston's elite wondering who the man in the off-the-rack suit was. I heard whispers, saw raised eyebrows. By the time we reached the front pew, my face was burning. "Here you are, sir," the usher said, gesturing to a seat at the very end of the front row, as far from the Hendersons as possible while still technically being in the family section. Robert Henderson glanced at me, then quickly looked away. His wife didn't even bother with that courtesy. I sat down, folding my hands in my lap. On my left wrist, I still wore the battered Timex that Margaret had given me on our first anniversary. "So you'll always have time for me," she'd said, laughing. The memory made my chest ache. She'd been gone for almost 15 years now, taken by a cancer that moved too quickly for any of us to prepare. Olivia had been just 18. I often wondered if things would be different if Margaret had lived. Would Olivia still have drifted away from me? Would she have been ashamed to introduce me to her wealthy college friends? Would she have changed her name from Mitchell to her mother's maiden name, Carter, claiming it sounded more professional for her career in finance? The organist began playing, signaling the start of the ceremony. The guests stood as Daniel and his groomsmen took their places at the altar. Daniel looked every inch the successful hedge fund manager in his custom tuxedo. His perfect white smile revealed teeth that had cost more than my first car. As he scanned the crowd, his eyes met mine for a brief moment. There was no warmth there, only a flicker of annoyance quickly masked. Then the bridal march began, and all eyes turned to the back of the church. I stood with everyone else, my heart pounding as I caught my first glimpse of Olivia. She was breathtaking in a gown that probably cost more than I made in 6 months. Her dark hair was swept up elegantly, showing off the diamond earrings that had been her mother's, the one piece of our shared past she hadn't discarded. As she glided down the aisle on Robert Henderson's arm, I felt a wave of confusion, then pain. Robert was walking my daughter down the aisle, not me. The father of the groom was giving away the bride, while the father of the bride watched from the sidelines. I hadn't been asked, hadn't even been told. Olivia passed by without looking at me, her eyes fixed on Daniel. The smile on her face was one I hadn't seen in years, not directed at me anyway, pure happiness, uncomplicated joy. I remained standing as they reached the altar, as Robert placed Olivia's hand in Daniel's, as the minister welcomed everyone to the union of Daniel Robert Henderson and Olivia Margaret Carter. Not Mitchell, Carter. I sat down heavily as the ceremony continued, the words washing over me without really registering. I was too busy remembering a different Olivia, the little girl who'd once begged me to build her a treehouse in our small backyard, who'd sat on my shoulders at Red Sox games, who'd cried against my chest when her mother died and promised we'd always have each other. What had happened to us? When had I become the embarrassing secret, the old beggar who wasn't worthy of acknowledgement? The minister was speaking about the foundation of marriage, about honesty and respect. I almost laughed out loud at the irony. My mind drifted back to 3 years ago when Olivia had graduated from business school. I'd driven to Cambridge in my work truck, having come straight from a job site. I'd planned to take her to dinner, nothing fancy, but a small Italian place we both loved. When I'd called to tell her I was outside her apartment building, she'd been flustered. "Dad, I told you we're having a reception at the faculty club," she'd said. "I know, sweetie, I just thought we could have dinner first, just us." "That's not. I mean, I'm already dressed for the reception, and Daniel's parents are here. They've rented a car to drive us." "I can drive you," I'd offered. The silence on the other end had been deafening. "Dad," she'd finally said, her voice lowered, "you can't just show up in your work clothes. This is important. These are people I need to impress." I'd looked down at my clothes, clean jeans, a button-up shirt that Margaret had bought me, kept in the truck for client meetings, steel-toed boots freshly wiped down. "I brought a jacket," I'd said weakly. "Just meet us at the faculty club, okay? There's valet parking." There hadn't been valet parking for my 15-year-old Ford F-Minus 150. I'd parked 3 blocks away and walked in the rain. The memory faded as the minister asked for the rings. I watched as Daniel slid a platinum band onto Olivia's finger as she did the same for him. Then they were kissing, and everyone was applauding, and it was done. My daughter was Mrs. Daniel Henderson now. The recessional began, and the newlyweds walked back down the aisle, followed by the wedding party. Olivia's eyes met mine for the first time as she passed, and she gave me a quick smile, the kind you give to a casual acquaintance, not your only living parent. I stayed seated as the guests began to file out. There would be photos, I knew, but I hadn't been asked to be in them. There would be a reception at the Boston Harbor Hotel, and while my invitation included that, I was already questioning whether I should go. What was the point? To sit at a table with strangers, to watch as Olivia danced with Robert for the father-daughter dance. "Mr. Mitchell." I looked up to see a young woman in a pale blue dress, one of Olivia's bridesmaids. I recognized her as Sophia, Olivia's roommate from college. "The photographer wants to start family photos," she said, her expression sympathetic. "Olivia asked me to find you." At least I hadn't been completely forgotten. I followed Sophia out to the church steps, where a photographer was arranging various groupings. Olivia stood with Daniel and his parents, all of them laughing at something Robert had said. "I've got him," Sophia announced, and Olivia turned. "Dad," she said, coming over to me, "you made it." As if there had been some doubt, as if attending my only child's wedding was an optional engagement. "Wouldn't have missed it," I said, forcing a smile. "You look beautiful, Liv." "Thanks." She glanced back at the Hendersons, then lowered her voice. Listen, we're doing just a few quick photos here. The professional ones will be at the harbor later. You don't have to stay for all of them. Translation, you're not wanted in most of them. I nodded, swallowing the hurt. Whatever you need, sweetheart. In the end, I was included in exactly 3 photos. One with just Olivia, one with Olivia and Daniel, and one with the entire wedding party where I was positioned at the far edge, almost as an afterthought. As the photographer announced they were moving to the harbor, Olivia touched my arm. You're coming to the reception, right? I hesitated. I was thinking I might skip it. I'm a little tired and— Dad, she interrupted, her voice sharp. It's my wedding. I looked at her, really looked at her. There was no warmth in her eyes, no genuine desire for my presence. This was about appearances, about not having to explain why her father wasn't at her wedding reception. Of course, I said quietly. I'll be there, she nodded, already turning away. Great, we're taking the limos, but you can meet us there. It starts at 6. I watched as she rejoined Daniel, sliding her arm through his as they walked to the waiting limousine. The wedding party followed, everyone laughing and talking excitedly. No one looked back at me, standing alone on the church steps in my J.C. Penney suit. I walked slowly to my truck, parked 6 blocks away in the only free parking I could find. As I drove toward the harbor, I thought about what lay ahead. Hours of sitting alone at a table of strangers, watching my daughter celebrate with her new family, a family that clearly didn't include me. I could almost hear Margaret's voice. Jimmy, you can't run away from this. She's still our girl. But was she? The Olivia I'd raised wouldn't have let her father be called a beggar on her wedding day. Wouldn't have excluded him from walking her down the aisle. Wouldn't have acted like his presence was an obligation rather than a joy. I parked in the hotel's garage, wincing at the $45 fee, and made my way to the grand ballroom. The space had been transformed into something out of a fairy tale, with white flowers everywhere, crystal centerpieces catching the light from dozens of candles, and floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the harbor where the setting sun painted the water gold. A young woman at the entrance asked for my name, then consulted her list. Mr. Mitchell, you're at table 19. Table 19 turned out to be in the far corner of the room, near the kitchen doors. I recognized none of the other guests already seated there. Most looked to be distant relatives or business associates who couldn't be excluded, but weren't important enough for prime seating. I introduced myself as Olivia's father, receiving polite but surprised responses. One woman, who introduced herself as Daniel's aunt, actually said, "Oh, we thought Olivia's father had passed, since Robert walked her down the aisle." I mumbled something about it being a mutual decision and excused myself to the bar, where I ordered a whiskey neat. The bartender, a young man with kind eyes, poured generously. Tough day, he asked, sliding the glass toward me. My daughter got married, I replied. Congratulations, he said automatically. I took a long sip. Thanks. I found a quiet spot near one of the windows, watching as more guests arrived. The ballroom was filling up, the noise level rising as people found their seats and greeted each other. The wedding party would make their entrance soon. Mr. Mitchell, I turned to see Sophia again, looking concerned. I just wanted to check on you, she said. Make sure you found your table okay. I nodded, grateful for the small kindness. I did, thank you. She hesitated, then said, I wanted you to know. I've always thought you got a raw deal. From Olivia, I mean. She glanced around, making sure no one was listening. I was there, you know, when she started changing, freshman year at Wellesley. She met Daniel at a Harvard Wellesley mixer, and suddenly she was embarrassed about where she came from. Started telling people her mom had been from this old Boston family, that her dad was in real estate development instead of construction. I stared at her, speechless. I'm sorry, she said quickly. I shouldn't have said anything. It's her wedding day. No, I managed. Thank you for telling me. I've spent years wondering what I did wrong. Sophia shook her head. You didn't do anything wrong, she just wanted to be someone else, someone who fit into Daniel's world. She touched my arm gently. For what it's worth, I think she lost something important when she decided to reinvent herself. Before I could respond, there was a loud announcement that the wedding party was arriving. Sophia squeezed my arm once more, then hurried to take her place in the entrance line. I returned to table 19 as the DJ introduced the bridesmaids and groomsmen, followed by the parents of the groom, and finally, Mr. and Mrs. Daniel Henderson. Everyone applauded as Olivia and Daniel entered, holding hands and beaming. They looked perfect together, like they belonged on a magazine cover. They moved to the center of the dance floor for their first dance as husband and wife. As I watched them sway to At Last by Etta James, I remembered teaching Olivia to dance when she was little, letting her stand on my feet as we moved around our small living room. Margaret had laughed, taking pictures with our cheap camera. "She's going to break hearts someday," she'd said. Instead, Olivia had broken mine. The first dance ended and the DJ announced, "And now the bride will share a special dance with her father." My heart jumped, had there been a change of plans. But then Robert Henderson stepped onto the dance floor, taking Olivia's hand as Wind Beneath My Wings began to play. I felt sick, physically ill. This wasn't just an oversight or a casual slight. This was deliberate. Olivia had chosen another man to take my place, to claim the role I'd earned through years of sacrifices and unconditional love. I couldn't watch. I turned away, intending to head for the exit, when I nearly collided with Daniel's mother, Elaine. "Oh," she exclaimed, steadying herself. "Mr. Mitchell, I didn't see you there." "Excuse me," I muttered, trying to step around her. "Actually," she said, lowering her voice, "I've been meaning to speak with you." Her perfectly manicured hand touched my arm, steering me toward a quiet corner. "I just wanted to make sure we're all on the same page about expectations." I frowned. "Expectations?" She smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. "Daniel and Olivia will be starting their lives together, and naturally, they'll need to focus on building their future. Their careers are so demanding, you understand." I said nothing, waiting for her to get to the point. "What I'm trying to say is they won't have much time for family obligations, especially ones that might be, well, complicated." She glanced meaningfully toward the dance floor, where Olivia was still dancing with Robert. "I think it would be best for everyone if you kept your distance. Let them establish themselves without any distractions." The blood rushed to my face. "Are you telling me to stay away from my own daughter?" "I'm suggesting," she said, her voice hardening slightly, "that you consider what's best for Olivia. She's worked very hard to build the life she has now, to create the right connections, the right image. Surely you want what's best for her." Before I could respond, before I could tell this woman exactly what I thought of her and her suggestion, a waiter appeared with a tray of champagne. "For the toast," he explained. Elaine took a glass, her mask of politeness firmly back in place. "We should get back to our seats. The speeches will be starting soon." She walked away, leaving me stunned and shaking with anger. I didn't take a glass of champagne. Instead, I returned to the bar and ordered another whiskey, which I drank quickly before heading back to table 19. The father of the groom's speech was everything you'd expect: charming, witty, full of stories about Daniel's childhood achievements and gentle advice about marriage. He welcomed Olivia to the family with what seemed like genuine warmth. Everyone laughed and applauded. The best man spoke next, telling stories about Daniel's college days and how he'd known Olivia was the one from the moment they met. Then it was the maid of honor's turn, not Sophia, but a girl named Madison who'd apparently been Olivia's sorority sister. "And now," the DJ announced, "the bride's father would like to say a few words." I froze, my heart pounding. I hadn't been asked to give a speech, hadn't prepared anything, but it wasn't me who stood up. It was Robert Henderson again, raising his glass with a practiced smile. "As the man who had the honor of walking this beautiful bride down the aisle today," he began, "I wanted to share just a few thoughts." I didn't hear the rest. The roaring in my ears was too loud. I sat rigidly in my chair, staring at nothing, as Robert gave the speech that should have been mine. Around me, people laughed and applauded, completely unaware of, or indifferent to, the charade taking place. When the speeches ended and dinner was served, I couldn't eat. The expensive steak and lobster might as well have been cardboard. I pushed the food around my plate, nodding mechanically at whatever the strangers at my table were saying. After dinner, the dancing began in earnest. I watched as Olivia moved from guest to guest, accepting congratulations and posing for photos. She hadn't spoken to me since the church steps, hadn't even looked in my direction. I waited until she was momentarily alone at the edge of the dance floor before approaching her. "Olivia," I said quietly. She turned, her smile faltering slightly. "Dad, are you having a good time?" The casual question, as if this were any normal social event, nearly broke me. "Why is Robert Henderson pretending to be your father?" I asked, my voice low but intense. She glanced around nervously. Dad, please, not here. When then? After the honeymoon, next Christmas, when you have children and he gets to be grandpa while I'm still the embarrassing secret. Her face hardened. You're making a scene. Am I? Because it seems to me that the real scene is happening right in front of everyone, and I'm the only one who sees it. I took a deep breath, trying to control my emotions. Why didn't you ask me to walk you down the aisle? To dance with you? To give a speech? For a moment, something like guilt flashed across her face. Then it was gone, replaced by the cool mask she'd perfected over the years. It wasn't personal, she said. Robert offered to pay for the wedding, and his family has certain expectations about how these things are done. It was easier this way. Easier, I repeated. Easier than telling the truth. Easier than acknowledging your actual father? Yes, she said flatly. Easier. Daniel's family is important, Dad. They have connections. They've helped me get where I am. And where is that exactly? Because from where I'm standing, it looks like you've sold your soul for a country club membership and a summer house in the Hamptons. Her eyes flashed with anger. That's not fair. You have no idea what it's like. What's like? Having opportunities. Because I gave those to you, Olivia. I worked 60-hour weeks so you could go to good schools. I took out a second mortgage on our house to help pay for Wellesley when the scholarship wasn't enough. I did everything I could to give you a better life than I had. And I'm grateful, she said automatically, though her tone suggested otherwise. But this is my life now. These are my choices. Your choices, I echoed. Like choosing to let your new father-in-law play the role of your father. Like choosing to use your mother's maiden name instead of mine. Tell me, Olivia, was changing your name to Carter your choice, or was it Daniel's? She looked away. It doesn't matter. It matters to me, I said. Because the last time I checked, I was still your father. Not Robert Henderson, me, James Mitchell, the man who built houses with his hands so you could have a roof over your head and food on the table. The man who read you bedtime stories and checked for monsters under the bed. The man who held you when your mother died and promised you'd never be alone. Tears filled her eyes, but whether from emotion or embarrassment, I couldn't tell. Please, she whispered, just let me have today. We can talk about all this later. Before I could respond, Daniel appeared, sliding an arm possessively around Olivia's waist. Everything okay here? He asked, his smile not reaching his eyes. Fine, Olivia said quickly. Dad was just congratulating us. Daniel nodded, his gaze dismissive. Great. Well, we need to cut the cake soon, and then we have that surprise announcement. Surprise announcement? I looked at Olivia questioningly, but she avoided my eyes. I'll be right there, she told Daniel, who gave me one last cold look before walking away. What announcement? I asked. She sighed. We're moving to London. Daniel's firm is opening a European office and he's been asked to head it up. We leave the day after tomorrow. The news hit me like a physical blow. London. When were you going to tell me? I'm telling you now, she said defensively. It happened quickly. The final details were just confirmed last week. And you didn't think to mention it before your wedding day. Before I found out in front of 200 strangers, she had the grace to look slightly ashamed. I knew you'd be upset. Upset? I laughed bitterly. Olivia, I'm way past upset. I'm heartbroken. Not just about London, but about all of it. About what you've become. About how easily you've erased me from your life. That's not what I've done, she protested, but weakly. Isn't it? Look around, Olivia. Look at this wedding, the wedding of my only child, where I'm seated at the back of the room with people who didn't even know I existed. Where another man has taken my place in every meaningful moment. Where I'm treated like an unwelcome intrusion rather than the father of the bride. She started to respond, but the DJ's voice cut through the music. Ladies and gentlemen, it's time for the bride and groom to cut the cake. Olivia looked torn for a moment, then said, I have to go. We'll talk later, I promise. I watched her walk away, knowing full well that later would never come. Not today, not after the honeymoon, not when they were settled in London. The distance between us, both emotional and soon to be physical, had become too great to bridge. I stayed long enough to watch them cut the cake, to hear their announcement about London, met with gasps of excitement and applause from the guests, and to see them begin the process of saying goodbye to everyone. Then, while Olivia was surrounded by well-wishers on the other side of the room, I slipped out. The night air was cool as I walked to my truck. The harbor lights reflected on the water, and somewhere in the distance, a boat horn sounded, low and mournful, like a lament. I drove home to my small apartment, the silence in the cab broken only by the occasional ping from my phone texts from friends who'd attended the wedding, asking if I was okay. I didn't answer them. I didn't know how to put into words what I was feeling. When I reached my building, I sat in the truck for a long time, staring at nothing. The pain in my chest was physical, like something was being torn out of me. I'd lost Margaret 15 years ago to cancer, and now I'd lost Olivia to something I couldn't even name. Ambition? Social climbing? Or just the slow, inevitable drift that happens when a child decides they want a different life than the one their parent can offer? Finally, I went upstairs to my apartment. It was small but neat. One bedroom, a living room with a kitchenette, and a bathroom that was always a little drafty in winter. The walls were covered with photos of Olivia, from her birth to her college graduation. There were none more recent than that. She hadn't sent me any. I changed out of my suit and sat on the edge of my bed, Margaret's photo on the nightstand next to me. "What would you do, Mags?" I asked the silence. "What would you say to our girl?" But Margaret had been gone for 15 years, and I was alone with my grief and anger. I didn't sleep that night. Instead, I sat at my small kitchen table with a legal pad, writing everything I wanted to say to Olivia, but never would. All the hurt, all the disappointment, all the love that still remained despite everything. When the sun rose, I had 12 pages filled with my messy handwriting. I folded them carefully and put them in the drawer where I kept important documents. My will, Margaret's death certificate, the deed to our old house that I'd had to sell after she died. Then I made coffee and tried to figure out what came next. How to live with this new reality where my only child had not just moved on from me, but had actively erased me from her narrative. The answer came 3 days later, in the form of a registered letter from a law firm I'd never heard of. Inside was a document titled Quitclaim Deed, and a brief note explaining that Olivia and Daniel were purchasing a property in Westwood, an affluent suburb west of Boston, and needed me to sign away any interest in my current apartment building. I frowned, confused. I didn't own the building, I just rented the apartment. I called the number on the letterhead and spoke to a lawyer who seemed equally puzzled. "Let me look into this," he said. "There must be some misunderstanding." He called back the next day. "Mr. Mitchell, I've discovered something unusual. It appears that you do, in fact, have an ownership interest in the building where you live. According to county records, your late wife, Margaret Mitchell, inherited a 25% stake in the property from her grandfather, Elias Carter. The building was part of a larger estate that was divided among several family members." I sat down heavily on my couch. "That's impossible. Margaret never mentioned owning any part of this building. We were always renters." "The records are clear," the lawyer said, "and there's more. The Carter estate included several other properties in the Boston area, most of which were sold off over the years. But there's one remaining property, a commercial building in Cambridge, that's still jointly owned by the Carter heirs. According to the documents I'm looking at, you and your daughter Olivia are entitled to a share of the rental income from that property." My mind was reeling. How much rental income? Based on the current tenants and the percentage ownership, approximately $12,000 per month. I nearly dropped the phone. $12,000 per month. For how long? "The records show rental income being generated for at least the past 20 years, he said, his voice betraying his own surprise at the situation. 20 years. Margaret and I had struggled to make ends meet, had taken out loans for Olivia's education, had pinched pennies and worked overtime, all while apparently being entitled to thousands of dollars each month. "Who's been receiving this income?" I asked, though I already suspected the answer. "The funds have been deposited into an account at Boston National Bank," the lawyer said. "I don't have access to the account details, but the authorized signatories are listed as Elias Carter, Margaret Carter Mitchell, and more recently, Olivia Mitchell Carter." My daughter had known. She had known about this inheritance, this income, and had kept it from me. Had changed her name to Carter not just to distance herself from me, but to claim an inheritance she didn't want to share. "Mr. Mitchell, are you still there?" I cleared my throat. "Yes, sorry, this is a lot to take in. I understand. If you'd like, I can represent you in this matter. It seems clear that there's been some serious financial impropriety here." "Yes," I said, my voice stronger now. "I would like that very much." The next few weeks were a blur of legal meetings, document searches, and increasingly disturbing discoveries. The lawyer I'd spoken to, Michael Brennan, specialized in estate litigation and took my case on contingency, convinced that we had a strong claim. What we uncovered was worse than I'd initially thought. Not only had Olivia known about the inheritance and rental income, but she had actively worked to hide it from me. She had set up a separate account in her name and her mother's maiden name, redirecting the funds that should have been shared with me. The paper trail was damning: forms with forged signatures, notarized documents with impossible dates, and emails between Olivia and various financial advisors discussing how to restructure the inheritance to exclude me. And it had all started 4 years ago, right around the time she'd met Daniel Henderson. The more we discovered, the more my grief turned to anger. This wasn't just about social climbing or embarrassment over her blue-collar father. This was theft, deliberate, calculated theft. "We have enough to file a civil suit," Michael told me after 6 weeks of investigation, "and possibly pursue criminal charges for the forgeries. But before we do that, I'd like to approach them with a settlement offer. It might be easier on everyone." I nodded, though easier wasn't what I was looking for anymore. I wanted justice. I wanted Olivia and Daniel, who I was now convinced had orchestrated much of this, to face consequences for what they'd done. Michael drafted a letter outlining our findings and proposed a settlement: full restitution of the misappropriated funds, which now totaled well over $800,000, transfer of the 25% ownership of my apartment building fully into my name, and a proper accounting of all Carter estate assets. We sent the letter to Olivia and Daniel's new address in London, which I'd obtained through some basic online searching. 3 days later, I received a call from a British phone number. "Dad," Olivia's voice was shaky. "What is this? What are you doing?" "I think the letter explains it pretty clearly," I said, my voice calmer than I felt. "You stole from me, Olivia. You took what was rightfully mine, what your mother would have wanted me to have, and you kept it for yourself." "It's not like that," she protested. "The Carter inheritance was always meant to stay in the family. Mom would have—" "Don't," I interrupted. "Don't you dare tell me what your mother would have wanted. Margaret would never have lied to me, never have hidden something like this from me. And she certainly wouldn't have approved of you forging documents to steal from your own father." There was a long silence, and then Olivia's voice changed, becoming harder. "Daniel wants to speak with you." Before I could object, Daniel was on the line. "James," he said, his tone falsely cordial, "I think there's been a misunderstanding. The Carter estate is quite complicated, with trusts and conditions that go back generations. Olivia was simply trying to honor her mother's family's wishes by keeping the assets within the Carter line. By forging my signature, by redirecting funds that were legally mine, that's not honoring anyone's wishes, Daniel. That's fraud," he sighed, as if I were being unreasonable. "Look, we're willing to make this right. We can offer you a one-time payment of $100,000 to compensate for any misunderstanding, and in return, you'll sign the quit-claim deed and relinquish any further claims on the Carter estate." $100,000, I laughed bitterly. "When you've stolen over 8 times that amount, I don't think so." "Be reasonable, James. Do you really want to drag your daughter through a lawsuit to risk her reputation, her career, over what is, essentially, a family dispute about inheritance?" His condescension, his attempt to minimize what they'd done, only strengthened my resolve. "This isn't a family dispute, Daniel. It's theft. And yes, I'm prepared to see it through to the end. You have 3 days to accept the settlement offer. After that, we file the lawsuit and contact the authorities about the forged documents." I hung up before he could respond, my heart pounding but my mind clear. For the first time in years, I felt like I was standing up for myself, for the James Mitchell who had worked honestly his whole life, who had loved his wife and daughter unconditionally, who had never asked for more than what he'd earned. 3 days passed with no response. On the fourth day, Michael filed the lawsuit. The next few months were a whirlwind of legal proceedings, depositions, and increasingly desperate attempts by Olivia and Daniel to discredit me. They claimed I'd known about the inheritance all along, but had been too irresponsible to manage it. They suggested that Margaret had intentionally kept me in the dark because of my spending habits. I'd never had money to spend. They even tried to argue that the statute of limitations had passed, though the ongoing nature of the theft made that argument weak. Through it all, I held firm. The evidence was on my side, and each new document we uncovered only strengthened our case. Bank records showed large transfers from the Carter estate account to personal accounts in Olivia and Daniel's names. Emails revealed their deliberate strategy to exclude me. And most damning of all, we found drafts of the forged documents on Olivia's old laptop, which she'd left behind in Boston and which was still connected to her cloud storage. The case never went to trial. 2 weeks before our court date, Michael received a call from Daniel and Olivia's lawyers, requesting a meeting to discuss settlement terms. This time, they were ready to accept our original demands, with one addition. They want a non-disclosure agreement, Michael explained, complete confidentiality about the settlement and the circumstances surrounding it. So they can save face, I said, unsurprised. Keep their reputation intact, Michael nodded. It's standard in these cases, and honestly, it doesn't hurt our position at all. You'll get everything you're entitled to, and they get to avoid public embarrassment. I thought about it for a long moment. Part of me wanted the world to know what they'd done, especially the Boston society that had welcomed them while looking down on me. But another part, the part that still remembered Olivia as my little girl, hesitated at the thought of publicly humiliating her. Fine, I said finally, I'll sign the NDA, but I want one more thing added to the settlement. What's that? I want a face-to-face meeting with both of them, here in Boston, before anything is signed. Michael raised an eyebrow. That's an unusual request. They may not agree to it. It's non-negotiable, I said firmly. Tell them that. To my surprise, they agreed. The meeting was set for the following week at Michael's office in downtown Boston. I arrived early, dressed in a new suit, not from J.C. Penney this time, but from Brooks Brothers. A small indulgence using some of the back rent I'd already received from my apartment building once my ownership was established. Olivia and Daniel arrived precisely on time, both looking tired and tense. Olivia wouldn't meet my eyes as they sat down across from me at the conference table. Michael and their lawyer, a stern-looking woman in her 50s, sat at opposite ends. Before we proceed with the settlement, Michael began, Mr. Mitchell has requested this meeting as a condition of signing the non-disclosure agreement. Daniel's lawyer frowned. My clients have agreed to all the financial terms. This meeting wasn't part of our original negotiation. And yet, here we are, Michael said smoothly. Mr. Mitchell, I looked directly at Olivia, who finally raised her eyes to meet mine. What I saw there wasn't remorse or shame, it was resentment, as if I were the one who had wronged her. I want to know why, I said simply. Why did you do it, Olivia? Why did you steal from me? Why did you shut me out of your life? She glanced at her lawyer, who nodded slightly. It wasn't personal, Olivia said, echoing her words from the wedding. The Carter inheritance had conditions. It was meant to stay within the Carter family line. When I learned about it from Mom's cousin Elizabeth, I was just trying to honor those conditions. By forging my signature, by hiding the entire inheritance from me for years. That was honoring conditions, Daniel stepped in. The situation was complicated. The original documents were unclear about spousal rights versus direct descendants. We consulted with financial advisors who suggested that the cleanest approach was to steal, I interrupted. To lie, to cut me out completely. We were going to tell you, Olivia said, but the lie was transparent. After the wedding, after we were settled in London, we were going to set up a trust for you, make sure you were taken care of. Taken care of, I repeated, like a child or a charity case. Not like a man entitled to his own property, his own money. She had the grace to look away. And the wedding, I pressed. Robert walking you down the aisle, the old beggar comment. Was that part of honoring conditions too? Olivia flinched. You heard that? I did, every word. Daniel shifted uncomfortably. That was unfortunate, a poor choice of words in a stressful moment. It was cruel, I said. Deliberately cruel. Just like excluding me from every meaningful part of the wedding was cruel. Just like changing your name to Carter to distance yourself from me was cruel. The name change was for the inheritance, Olivia said quickly. The lawyers suggested it would strengthen our claim if I used the Carter name. And that made it okay? To erase your father's name? To pretend to be someone you're not? She had no answer for that. I leaned forward. Here's what I think happened. I think you were embarrassed by me long before you knew about any inheritance. I think when you met Daniel and his family, you saw a world you wanted to be part of. a world where having a contractor for a father wasn't good enough. So you started reinventing yourself, and when you discovered the Carter inheritance, it wasn't just convenient financially, it gave you a new identity, a way to belong to that world. The flush on her cheeks told me I'd hit the mark. And you, I said, turning to Daniel, you saw an opportunity, a naive girl desperate to fit in, with a convenient inheritance she was willing to do anything to claim, including cutting out her own father. That's not, he began, but I cut him off. It is, you encouraged her. You helped her plan it. Your name is on half the documents we found. You didn't just marry my daughter, you helped turn her into someone who would steal from her own family. Daniel's face hardened. Are we done here? We've agreed to your terms. We're prepared to sign the settlement. This recrimination serves no purpose. I studied him for a moment, this man who had helped destroy my relationship with my only child, who had called me a beggar on his wedding day, who had orchestrated a fraud that had robbed me of not just money, but dignity. You're right, I said finally. This serves no purpose. You're not going to admit what you did was wrong. You're not going to apologize and mean it. You're just going to sign the papers, write the checks, and go back to London, telling yourselves whatever story helps you sleep at night. I turned to Olivia. But I want you to know something. I'm signing this NDA today. I won't tell anyone what you did. Not your friends, not Daniel's family, not the society people you're so desperate to impress. Your reputation will remain intact. Relief flashed across her face. I'm doing this not because you deserve it, I continued, but because despite everything, you're still my daughter. And parents protect their children even from their own mistakes, even when those children have hurt them beyond measure. Tears filled her eyes, but whether from guilt or simply relief that her social standing would be preserved, I couldn't tell. The settlement includes full restitution, correct? I asked Michael. He nodded. Yes, all misappropriated funds with interest plus ownership of your share of the properties. Good, I stood up. Then let's sign the papers and be done with it. The signing took less than 15 minutes. When it was complete, when I had legally reclaimed what was rightfully mine and Olivia and Daniel had agreed to all our terms, I walked out of the conference room without looking back. I heard Olivia call my name once softly, but I didn't turn around. Outside, the summer air was warm, the sun bright on the city streets. I walked slowly, feeling a weight lifting from my shoulders with each step. It wasn't just about the money, though that would certainly change my life. It was about standing up for myself, about refusing to be erased or diminished or treated as less than I was. In the months that followed, I rebuilt my life. I retired from contracting, my body grateful for the rest after decades of physical labor. I renovated my apartment, making it truly mine for the first time. I reconnected with old friends, traveled a little, and eventually started volunteering at a community center, teaching woodworking to at-risk youth. The money from the settlement and the ongoing rental income allowed me a comfort I'd never known before. Not luxury, not extravagance, but freedom from worry. The ability to help others. The space to grieve what I'd lost, both Margaret and, in a different way, Olivia. I heard from her occasionally, birthday cards, Christmas cards, brief emails, always formal, always distant. She and Daniel were still in London, building their careers, building a life that didn't include me. I responded politely but briefly. The breach between us was too deep, the trust too thoroughly broken for any meaningful reconciliation. Then, 3 years after the settlement, I received a letter with a London postmark. Inside was a single sheet of paper with Olivia's handwriting. Dad, I don't know if you'll read this, or if you'll believe me if you do, but I need to say it anyway. I'm sorry, truly, deeply sorry, not just for the money, but for everything, for shutting you out, for being ashamed of you when I should have been proud, for letting Daniel and his family convince me that where you come from matters more than who you are. Daniel and I are getting divorced. It turns out that the qualities that made him seem impressive to a naive girl, his ambition, his social connections, his family's influence, make him a terrible husband. Cold, controlling, always measuring everything and everyone by what they can do for him. I've been thinking a lot about you lately, about how you always put Mom and me first, how you worked so hard without complaint, how you loved us unconditionally. I don't expect forgiveness, I don't deserve it, but I wanted you to know that I understand now what I threw away, and I'm more sorry than I can ever express. Olivia, I read the letter 3 times, my hands shaking slightly. Then I put it carefully in the drawer with the 12 pages I'd written the night of her wedding, all the things I'd wanted to say to her but never had. 6 months later, I received another letter. Olivia was moving back to Boston. She'd found a job teaching mathematics at a public high school, a far cry from her finance career, but something she said made her happy. She'd gone back to using the name Mitchell. She asked if we could meet, just for coffee, just to talk. I thought about it for a long time. About the hurt, the betrayal, the years of being treated as less than I was. About the little girl who had once been my whole world. About second chances and forgiveness and the possibility of redemption. Then I wrote back with a time and place. I don't know what will happen when we meet. I don't know if we can ever rebuild what was broken. But I do know this. I walked into my daughter's wedding and heard myself called a beggar. I walked out of a lawyer's office 3 years later with my dignity restored and my future secure. And now, perhaps, I'll walk into a coffee shop and find something I thought was lost forever. The possibility of being a father again.